We're going to get under sail. We have a very exciting first session ahead of us. Hope you had a nice evening last night and moved seamlessly from the world cafes into dinner and perhaps beyond. Well, we're extremely fortunate this morning to have a keynote speaker who is going to tell us about the opportunities and challenges of conceiving of no net loss in Gabon. We have the Honourable Minister for the Environment, Noel Messone. Sir, please.
Working? Okay, there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, very honored to be here this morning amongst you. But let me first thank our hosts, DEFRA, Forest Friends, BIBOP, and GSL, for really indeed bringing us together in this important gathering on the preservation of biodiversity and the question of no net loss. Let me just talk a little bit about my country to set the context. My country, Gabon, is a little larger than the size of the United Kingdom, almost exactly the size of the state of Colorado in the US. Today, Gabon is 88% covered in tropical rainforests, making us the second most forested nation on the planet, with a deforestation rate of almost zero. It's exactly, I think, 0.008. In 2007, the late President Omar Bongo Ondimba signed a law creating a network of 13 national parks covering 11% of Gabon's land surface area. Today, together with 8 Ramsar sites and a number of wildlife preserves, about 21% of Gabon is protected today. The country is home to almost 60% of all surviving forest elephants and has an estimated 20,000 lowland gorillas, 25,000 chimpanzees. Our forests are home to, I would say, up to 10,000 plant species, and about 15% of those plants are endemic to Gabon. Our forests provide many ecosystem services of great importance to both the Gabonese people and to the planet. We're also blessed with rich mineral resources, including large deposits of iron ore, manganese, and significant onshore and offshore oil deposits. But we have yet to fully make evaluation of our biodiversity potential. I think this was one of the important questions that was raised yesterday during the first sessions. In 2009, our current president, His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba, was elected on the basis of a commitment to construct a new development model founded on the tenets of sustainable development and a wise use of natural resources, what we call in Gabon, Green Gabon, we call it in French, le Gabon vert. He has called other African countries to halt the exports of unprocessed commodities and to promote value-added transformation of our natural resources in country. We know that export of raw materials has yet to generate development in many countries, nor has it encouraged sustainable or environmentally sound practices. Our challenges is to achieve this sustainable development while learning from the mistakes of other nations who have sacrificed their natural capital in favor of short-term development goals. That is why in 2009, one of the first actions of the government was to ban the exports of raw lumber, raw timber, obliging all forest companies to respect legislation enacted in 2001 to promote sustainable harvest and local transformation of wood. This has reduced the total takeoff, but has increased the number of jobs in the sector, vesting responsible companies in the principles of long-term sustainable development. We are now starting to apply this philosophy to fisheries and to mineral resources. In a month, for the first time in our history, Gabonese tuna will be landed in Libreville and processed in Libreville. You may know that 100% of the catch was exported to Europe and Asia without even landing in country. Next year, steel and manganese processing plants will also open. It is our objective to halt the export of raw commodities by 2020. But better use of natural resources is no guarantee of sustainable development and environmental integrity. Our government is enacting new legislation designed to promote investment and to maintain that natural integrity. Recognizing our responsibility as stewards of global good, our planet, our objective is to avoid the deforestation curve that many nations experienced. In a planet more and more severely impacted by climate change, we consider this to be primarily our responsibility, and our head of state has made commitments in public to be a wise steward of our natural resources, natural assets. In order to achieve this overall goal, we have adopted a climate change plan, what we call the Plan Climat, which is a low-carbon development strategy that integrates the principle of low-carbon emissions into our national development framework. Now, we are working on a national land use plan that will coordinate all land allocation decisions, restricting activities such as palm oil, rubber, and mechanized agriculture to areas that have already been degraded or which are naturally covered by vegetation that is low in carbon content and conservation value, such as our fire climax savannas. The final arm of our legislative effort is a sustainable development law that has passed its first reading in the Parliament and the Senate. In fact, I have been Minister of Environment for the past 4 months, and this was one of my first legislative action to actually go in Parliament to defend this law. This code will implement annual sustainable development reports in all administrations and industries, and will create a system of sustainable development credit, an offsetting system, in fact, whereby carbon, biodiversity, and ecosystem services and community capital credits will be put in place to ensure that all industries take into account and compensate their negative impacts on sustainable development. We are convinced that in Gabon, with our 88% forest cover, that this sort of integrated cross-government approach is the only way to ensure the long-term viability of our forests and other ecosystems. An approach, in fact, that goes beyond the REDD+ readiness approach adopted by many governments. In fact, we've been in various controversies with other countries because they didn't quite understand why our approach was quite different from what the RED Plus approach was proposing. While the Gabonese government has not yet adopted what we would call here the no net loss as a policy, I think it's certainly a concept of great interest to us, and most of the measures that we are taking are in fact gearing towards some sort of no net loss policy. Major development projects by public-private partnership in Gabon are also committed to these principles. As I said, as a Minister of Forests, Environment and Protection of Natural Resources, my role is both to pilot the sustainable development of our country, forests and all the resources, and to ensure the environmental integrity of the country. In the context of climate change and biodiversity loss, we are determined to demonstrate that we can adopt a new development model that will combine economic and environmental success and will contribute both to the well-being of the people and the integrity of the planet. I'm here, first of all, to share some of these experiences of our work in progress, but also to listen and to hear from many other experiences of countries that have already embarked fully on this no net loss policies, many of which are very, very informative and inspiring to us. I was quite attentive yesterday when we talked about the role of government and some of the expectations that we as governments have, the dilemma between development and the need to protect our biodiversity, and also some of the conflicts that could emerge if we do not introduce these principles properly in our country, because many stakeholders have different views, and this often creates social tensions within our countries. Many of our countries have young civil society that sometimes finds it not easy to engage with government on a durable, constructive, and peaceful way. So a question like this also has a potential to create additional conflicts within different stakeholders in the country. That said, I would simply conclude by saying that the principles to which we all aspire are of fundamental importance in the world today, and I simply commit that we would continue to engage in this discussion, and I encourage all of you to continue to work, and we're certainly going to continue to be part of it. In the end, I would like you to consider, some of you who haven't not yet done it, to visit Gabon, and who knows, probably one of the next conference on this question could take place in Libreville at some point in time in the future. So I thank you very much for your invitation. Sure, yes.
We're lucky to have the company of the Minister in the government roundtable that will be starting very shortly. But in the meantime, if anybody had a couple of quick questions, he's agreed that he could take those. Anybody? No? Melissa, please.
Mr. Minister, I've had the great pleasure of visiting, Melissa Moy from WWF. I've had the great pleasure of visiting Gabon in the Gamba complex, which is an absolute stupendous place with forest elephants walking down the beach. But I've heard, actually, strangely enough, at this conference, that a road is being built that would go quite close to the Gamba complex. So I know you've spoken very much in terms of your broader policy work, but I'm just curious from a very practical point of view, when there's an initiative like building a road so close to a very important protected area complex, what concretely you're trying to do as a minister to make sure that there won't be serious impacts on such an important area.
Thank you. This brings us back to discussion we had yesterday about the Virunga situation too. What I do as minister is, first of all, which is a basic policy, is to request an environmental impact study. That is quite classical in projects like this. But we also are committed that we should keep to a bare minimum any negative impact on all these protected areas. One of the situations that I recently dealt with, there is a protected area in the Libreville area, in the capital city area, where a Noel company wanted to install a pipeline because it was very convenient to do so. We haven't yet decided on that because we're still looking into it, considering what really could be the impact. And we're not rushing on these sort of decisions, and we're really careful at ensuring that if we could avoid, or if it means postponing a project like this of vital importance, and because we also realize that infrastructure is key to this new development policy. I am from a region, I'm from the northeast of Gabon, where most of the iron ore deposits are. We entered negotiations with Chinese interests to exploit that mineral, iron ore minerals. We went back again and carefully considered what the impacts and what is required to sustainably carry out such a project. So we haven't done anything yet. In fact, we stopped the negotiations that we had with these Chinese interests just because we weren't quite sure yet what the environmental impact was going to be. So in my role, I'm always try to be the guardian. On the other side, the other ministries are pushing for quick development, but I'm always trying to be in the guardian's role. I'm lucky because the president usually sides with me because that's his broad vision too. So these are not easy discussions to have in government.
Let's take a couple more questions here, colleague from Uganda and Braulio, and then I think there'll be more opportunity to discuss in the roundtable. Yeah. Please, let's go.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. My name is John Makombo. I come from Uganda.
Thank you.
And the Honorable Minister, I know that Gabon is a tropical forest country, just like part of Uganda is, but if you look at Uganda, most of the land is already covered by large populations of community as compared to Gabon. And we recently discovered oil, including protected areas, which I think is not the case with the Gabon, because once you get oil in the protected area, you degazette immediately. But I'm looking at areas where you have community populations with oil, and how you cover up the offsets and the mitigations. Because most of the area in Gabon is basically oil in large masses of forests, where the impact is not largely felt. But where you have these communities, how do you go with the offsets? How do you go with the mitigations? As it's a big challenge for us in Uganda. we are really getting it rough. Probably you have that experience that you can share with us. Thank you, Honorable.
From our experience, first thing is really not to rush with these decisions. The temptation is always there that once you discover a resource such as oil with very huge expected payoffs, and that you rush, particularly when it is in a protected area. Second thing is, if there are communities around the area, to engage these communities, the temptation is always for the government to think that they know what is best for these communities and to make decisions accordingly. But that's not always the case, and it's important to really engage these communities. We recently made a decision with an agro-business company that wanted to start rubber plantations in an area with local communities around. We allow us the time, first of all, to decide where that project was going to be located. Would it be in an area that is sensitive in terms of biodiversity or not? Then we had to involve the local population at all levels to discuss, to explain what it is that this project was going to do, the impacts, and how that could directly benefit the populations. So that process took us quite a bit of time before we arrive, first of all, to identify the exact area, and secondly, to put in place sort of a charter between the company, the government, and the local communities on what was going to take place. Part of it involved some deforestation because trees had to be cut, and tree with certain economic value. What it is that is going to be done with that timber, and what share of that timber, if sold, was going to accrue to the local community for what purpose. And all this was part of a broad, lengthy discussion, organizing the communities, ensuring that this is what the government is going to do, this is what the company responsibility is. So I would say, really, to take the time to consider all these aspects. That may take a bit of time, but it's worth taking that time to make the, I would say, better decision than would have been done if you had rushed.
Fantastic, thank you. Braulio, you had a question. Microphone for Braulio, please.
Thank you. Minister, congratulations for the good work your government is doing in protecting biodiversity and to ensure that you add value in your countries based on the use of your rich biodiversity. I'd like to ask you whether Gabon already started looking at how to really quantify the value of its natural assets. There are some good international initiatives that could partner with Gabon if you haven't done that yet. So the UN Statistics Office issued in 2012 the new standards for environmental and economic accounting. The World Bank has the WAVES program, and Norway now is offering $5 million to help countries wishing to do that exercise. And then there are some other important initiatives to help countries create more financial mechanisms that can really build on the natural assets. For example, UNDP has a very interesting program on biodiversity financing, and they're already working with 19 countries. I'm not sure if Gabon is among them, but I'd like to listen from you and see whether you are trying to explore some of these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Secretary. I think I was very interested yesterday when we were talking about this whole issue of valuation. I think it's key. And capacity, somebody talked about capacity, is another challenge for countries like us. We are, of course, very, very interested in getting a hand on quantification and evaluation of our biodiversity potential, and so to speak, of our natural resources potential. We are looking into expanding our continental shelf, and this would also bring another challenge in terms of knowing exactly what it is beyond the exclusive zone in terms of resources and biodiversity. So we are definitely interested in, and I will be in touch and get back to you so we can start to consider. We've started something in very initial stages with the minister, my colleague, Minister of Economy, to see how we could integrate in the national accounting system some of these data, but it's still really in the early stages, and we would welcome any assistance and help we could get in devising, but also in training human capacity to continue to do the work.
Thank you. Well, just on that note, before we wrap up, wearing one of my other hats, I sit on the UK Natural Capital Committee.
Yes.
And here in England, we're going through a very similar exercise, trying to produce national income accounts that fully incorporate natural capital. And I'm sure the committee would be happy to share experiences. Braulio mentioned waves, and there are various initiatives. So I think it'd be great to foster a sharing of experience on that.
Sure.
Well, I think that was a lovely start to the day. The Minister is going to join us in the Government Roundtable, which is going to start now, and that's going to be across in Prince Albert Suite, and the Business Roundtable will stay in this room. Before you go, just one quick logistical point. We are going to change a little bit the plans for this afternoon. In your printed programmes, we've got a couple of sessions just at the end of the day. So there's a short final plenary, and before that we had originally intended to have 2 parallel sessions with government and with business. And actually we've heard from a lot of people that they think it would be better and more interesting to have everybody together. So what we propose to do is to have one rather long plenary in the afternoon. I don't have the programme in front of me, but I think the tea break ends at something like 3:30 or something like that. So, thank you. So, therefore, we would come back into plenary in this room at 3:30. And we've been communicating a little bit with some of the chairs and rapporteurs of the various sessions during the 2 days to ask them to help kick off with just a very brief half hour with some of their key impressions from the sessions that would then allow us a full hour of discussion before a very short wrap-up at the end. So please put your thinking caps on for that, and we'll break now into the 2 roundtables and later groups, and we'll reconvene as a plenary at 3:30.